Thank you. And for a second straight day now, Michael Jackson's ex-wife is on the witness stand in that wrongful death lawsuit against AEG. And today, more talk of Jackson suffering through continuous pain and sleep deprivation for decades. Let's go to Jim Nash. He's live in downtown L.A. for us. He's got the latest on this. Hello, Jimmy.
Yeah, hi, Rick. You know, Debbie Rowe painted a very different picture from the Michael Jackson that we've seen in so many news accounts in recent years. A much more sympathetic picture. And the Jackson family legal team also brought in some visual aids to back up Debbie Rowe's account of Jackson as a performer who was in constant pain and deprived of sleep.
Good morning, Miss Rowe.
Good morning. Michael Jackson's ex-wife came to court with more to say about the superstar she still admires, this time being questioned by the more friendly attorneys for the Jackson family. The Jackson legal team brought photos of vitiligo patients who can lose pigmentation all over their bodies, a disease Rowe said Jackson suffered from childhood, which eventually led to treatments that lightened his skin to hide the discolorations on his body. After Jackson suffered painful third-degree scalp burns in 1993, when a light exploded during the shooting of a Pepsi commercial, setting his hair on fire, Rowe says Jackson had keloids, scars on his scalp, even after plastic surgery. Along with skin bumps from discoid lupus, Rowe testified that Jackson was in constant pain and became addicted to powerful painkillers, including Demerol and Dilaudid, both opiates. Rowe blames competition among Jackson's many doctors for his dependence on painkillers and on propofol, the powerful anesthetic that eventually killed him in 2009. Rowe told the jury, despite constant pain and often unable to sleep for days, Jackson was, quote, happiest when he was in his creative state, especially performing live, as we see here, or in making short films, she said. And so Debbie Rowe is finished on the stand. She's headed back home in Riverside. Now, the question before the jury here in this civil trial is, did concert promoter AEG Live cause the death of Michael Jackson? Because they were paying the doctor who eventually gave him a lethal dose of propofol, the drug that killed him. Well, this afternoon, AEG is expected to call in another doctor on the stand who will support their case that they're not responsible for Jackson's death. We're live in downtown Los Angeles where the trial continues. Rick, Carolyn, back to you.
Okay, Jim Nash, thank you. The man who once posed as a member of the Rockefeller family has been sentenced to 27 years to life in prison for murder.
More on what led Debbie Rowe to tears. Randy?
That's right, Pat. This was a very emotional day today because today it was Jackson family attorneys who were doing the questioning.
Michael Jackson's ex-wife, Debbie Rowe, walked into the courthouse today for a second day where she provided powerful and sometimes emotional testimony about Michael Jackson's troubled life. Rowe described Jackson's performances as surreal, saying her favorite part was when a fan was allowed on the stage. And as the jury was shown this clip from the history tour, Debbie Rowe watched from the witness stand and cried. Rowe also talked about her decision to bear children for Michael Jackson. Michael wanted to be a father. I didn't sign on to be a mom. I loved him very much, and I still do. I wanted him to be a father. I wanted him to have everything he didn't have growing up. I wanted him to experience it with his own child, with his own children. When asked what impact Jackson's death has had on his children, Rowe sobbed, "Their father's dead." Then, speaking of their daughter Paris, she is devastated. She tried to kill herself. She is devastated. She has no life. She doesn't feel she has a life anymore. Earlier in the day, Rowe told the jury Michael Jackson was battling with a combination of painful medical problems, prompting doctors to compete for his loyalty by overprescribing pain medications, and she said Jackson trusted them. She testified people who get the worst medical care are the very rich and the very poor. The very rich can buy it, the very poor can't afford it, and the famous can dictate it, she testified. When asked if Michael Jackson was one of the famous who dictated his medical care, she replied, "I wouldn't say he was dictating, he was more begging for relief." When attorneys for AEG asked Rowe about Michael Jackson's use of propofol, the anesthetic that would later cause his death, Rowe testified Jackson used propofol to sleep the night before this concert in Munich in 1997. And she said she first became concerned about his use of the anesthetic, also known as Diprivan, in the late 80s and early 90s. The lead attorney for AEG, Marvin Putnam, said the reason he called Rowe as a defense witness was for the jury to understand the history of Michael Jackson's use of propofol.
I think what's important about it is this idea that this is a drug that Michael Jackson had been using for decades, and no one knew about it except for those in his tight inner circle.
But attorneys for the Jackson family say this was actually a very good witness for them, that Debbie Rowe was making many of the points they've been trying to make in this case, that Michael Jackson was an extremely good father. He's dealing with a lot of pain and trusted his doctors. Also, I want to share a touching moment inside the courtroom. As Debbie Rowe got off of the stand, she came up to Katherine Jackson, who was sitting in the front row. She bent down and she embraced her, and the two of them cried. And then Debbie Rowe looked at Trent Jackson, who is the nephew with Katherine Jackson, who's at least 6'1", 250, and she looked at him and she said, "You better be taking good care of her, because if you don't, I can beat you up." It was a lighter moment, but in the midst of a time when you could see these two women sharing profound grief over the death of Michael Jackson.